Yeah.
Hello, everybody! Welcome to another video. Today, I'm going to be doing something a little new, even though I've done a couple new things recently. Though, to be fair, this is actually something I've kind of done in the past. I've kind of done a review thing, but it was a little wonky, so not the point. But today, I will be going into a bit of a deep dive, as it were, into a game that I played a lot from my childhood, which is the game of life. Now, you're probably thinking the board game, because I mean, everyone's played the board game at some point in their life, especially in their childhood. But that's actually not what I'm covering. Nor am I covering about the game that came out a couple years ago. What I'm covering is the game of life that came out in '98 for the PC and for the PlayStation 1. And I'm very excited to cover this game because it means a lot to me. I'll go into more detail about that later. But yeah, without any further waiting, let's actually just get into the video because I'm really excited to actually talk about this. So first, I think I should probably cover the board game itself a little bit since that seems important, even though I think a lot of people probably should know what the board game is. But for any reason, I'll talk about it a little bit anyway. The original game came out in 1860, which was a very dark and kind of gruesome version of the game than it is known today. I'm not going to really go into detail on that. You can do your own research on that version of the game, but I'm going to talk about the one that came out in 1960, the one that everybody knows that it was made by Hasbro. This game, the objective is to win at life. I know that sounds silly and weird, but literally that's why it's called the game of life. You make very big and important decisions like, do I go to college or do I start off my career? You can get married, have kids, and just the weird little integral parts of life. The way to win the game is to make the most money out of all the players. You can do that by landing on random squares that give you money, like payday, or just other weird little things, or you can get life tiles, which by the end of the game, you can cash them in to get more money. So, yeah, that's pretty much the board game itself. And as like most board games that exist in the world, it has a video game adaptation. Because, money. Anyway, so the version that I'm covering today of the Game of Life came out in October of 1998. It was distributed by Hasbro Interactive, which is now Atari Interactive, if you're wondering. And the PC version of the game was made by Mass Media, and the PlayStation 1 port was made by The Collective, which is now defunct. Also, a bit of a side note, this game was so hard to find information for. Like, there's not even a Wikipedia for this version of the game. I couldn't find a lot, other than a lot of, like, defunct company information, which I don't want to get into here because it's a lot and it's not necessary to the game. The only thing I was able to find out that was actually at least decently interesting enough to me was that you could get this game in a cereal box as a prize. Now, I don't know what brand of cereal had this, or, like, what versions of the game, if not both versions of the game, were able to be won as a prize in a cereal box, but that's all I was able to really find about this game that was the least interesting, so that's kind of why this section is so short, which I apologize for, but with that, we can move on to what the video game is itself. So the game itself isn't too different from the board game when it comes to the rules and how it plays generally. I mean, you spin the spinner, you move the amount of space as it tells you, you get a prompt whether you pay taxes or you win the lottery, and again, you win the game by getting the most amount of money from the other players. So, not that different that way. What is different, however, is one, you can pick an avatar and the car you can have versus just the pink and blue little pieces you have for your character. And there are little cool cartoons and animations you get whenever you land on a square slash space. And another interesting thing that I think that's really interesting about this game, that of course I'll go into more detail later, is that you can go through different decades and there's music that fits the decade itself. Like example, there's for the 70s there's disco, and it goes all the way to the 2000s. It starts at the 1950s and then the 2000s. And the board is actually quite detailed. I mean, look, let's just be real. the real, board, at least now, from what I can remember, isn't really that detailed in real life. I mean, makes sense, but it isn't really that detailed. Versus the game, you can actually see some cool little Easter eggs from like other Hasbro games, like Sorry. It is very interesting to me. And there's also an additional game mode called the Enhance mode, which it kind of says what it is, it enhances the game, which I will get into a bit more later. But right now, what I really want to get into is just the overall, like, just aesthetic of the game. For example, it's very cool that you can actually pick your character versus just, again, having the little blue or pink pieces for your character. With this, you actually have 12 different ones. Now, they are a little bit shorter if you put it in the sense that they're just, two versions of the same character, just a male and female versions, which, whichever one you pick, they'll get married to the other, which is kind of lazy-ish, but I get it in a way, too. But that's fine. You also get to pick a car. I mean, there was always different colored cars, but I don't know. They're still, looking pretty cool in this game instead of just the plastic little bit of a car. Like, you have blue, red, yellow, green, orange, and white for some odd reason, which is interesting. I always found the white one to be fancy as a kid, and I always picked that one. Don't know, maybe because it was different and you never see it in a board game. Now I usually pick the blue one because I like blue, it's my favorite color. No, I'm not special for saying that blue is my favorite color, but it just is, so deal with it. And speaking of the characters themselves that you can pick, the animations for, like, the characters you have are, like, so just interesting and very detailed. More detailed than I've seen in a while in a game. Like, when you are your character, they'll obviously smile when you pick them, and when you're doing stuff, they'll idly blink while you're doing stuff. I only just noticed it recently when I was going back to the game that, yeah, they blink. And, just kind of, I mean, it's not really much, but it's still something. And they also will do this really funny thing where if it's not your turn, or, well, when it's not your turn, or if it's not the player's turn in general, they'll turn and look disgusted at whoever's turn it is. And it's funny to me just how nasty they look. They look so, it's funny to me. But yeah, but also, like, just the animations in this game is good. The driving animation is fun addition. Again, you can turn the stuff off if you don't want it. Of course, that they're driving animations and stuff like that. But I like driving animations. It's kind of cool just to see the front, first person view look, and anticipating which square you're gonna land on. And the cartoons and animations for the squares you land on are hit or miss. Some of them are cool and funny-ish. They get me a chuckle, but the majority of them, especially when it comes to the comics, kind of don't resonate. I don't know if it's because of my age. Maybe I'm too, young to understand some of the jokes they put here. Or if they really aren't that funny. I don't know. Either way, there's still a charge in the game that I really like, and I still think makes it more interesting than the general board game, because, the board game doesn't, obviously you don't get to see animations, all of a sudden they don't pop up on your face, so it at least adds something to the game that otherwise wasn't there in the first place. So now that we're done talking about that, let us actually go into the enhanced game mode that I mentioned earlier, which, as I said, it enhances the game a bit. Now, it doesn't really do too much. It doesn't change the game rules really overall. You still have to win, with the most amount of money. But it does change some aspects of the game. For example, instead of getting life tiles, as I mentioned before, where when you cash them in, you get more money to help you win the game, you get to play these mini games called Life's Little Games. They, obviously, as they are called, mini games that you play throughout the game. Now, there's a couple of things you can have. Either you can obviously spin the spinner no matter what. You spin the spinner, you can land on some money, you land on a game. There's a couple different games, I think 12 in total. It's really hard to count because a lot of the same ones come up over and over again, but I believe there's 12 in total. A lot of them are like kind of either matching games or, revealing games type of thing there. There's only like one or two different games I think are different. One of them is the ball drop, where you drop a ball into a certain amount of money spots, and the goal is you want to land at every single one. However, you land in one twice, they will remove it, so you have to be careful with your shots. But, like, that one's, like, interesting enough. All the other ones are pretty generic. Again, like I said, matching games, trying to spell out the word life, and, trying to get the, highest money you can throughout the games. It's kind of interesting, and Pretty simple, but it's still cool. You have to, instead of spin the spinner for a house, you get a house. You can pick a house and you spend the amount of money you will have to pay for said house. There is revenge, which is also in the Lifesteal games, where if you land on payday, you can pick one of the players that you have that has obviously the more money. Obviously, that makes more sense. And you can take their money, whatever salary you have, or if you're doing the mini game mode with whatever money you spin on, in general. Overall, it's pretty simple. Like the new enhanced mode they have in this game. It's not like crazy, but it does add a little bit of charm to the game. It does add a little bit more. If you're wanting something a little more different than the classic game mode, you're kind of bored and you want to change something up, then the enhanced game mode is pretty fun in a way. Again, it doesn't change too much. The cutscenes don't change or anything, but it does get probably interesting the more players you have, because if you land on a payday, who's gonna get got, type of thing. Or, oh dang, they land on a mini game, how much money they're gonna get, type of situation. It is very interesting, and again, it adds to the game mode that wasn't there in the classic game. So now I want to get into the graphics and sounds and stuff like that for this part of the video, since I haven't really covered it yet, at least not in full detail. So yeah, the graphics are pretty alright. I mean, they're from 98, so they're not gonna be like the most top tier graphics you ever seen. They're not gonna be like, oh my god, this is like the pinnacle of graphics in gaming. Like, no. But they're pretty alright for what they are, so I think that's fine that way. I mean, the one thing that's a little weird now is the big heads, but I mean, it was the 90s, big head mode was a thing, so yeah. And I think also they were trying to depict, the little pieces. But yeah, the sound also in this game is not too bad. It does get a little weird sometimes, but I think that could be because my game is old. It's very scratched up. It's been played with many a times. I was saying it like it's a toy. It's not a toy, but still it's been played many a time. But like the sound's okay. It's fine for what it is. I mean, this seems like to me, I mean, again, I could be wrong about this, let me know, but Mass Media, the studio that made the game, they seemed like a tiny team at the time, so like for what it is, it's actually not terribly bad. And speaking of something that's not terribly bad, actually, and really surprising to me, if anything, is the voice acting in this game. The voice acting is not bad. Again, it seems like a small team did this, and for all I know, it could have been the team itself. They didn't hire voice actors or something. Could have been them themselves, whatever, the animators or whatever that did the voice acting. But again, if I'm wrong about this, let me know. But I don't know. Yeah, it seems like the voice acting in this game is pretty good. Like, I really like the voice acting, especially in the cartoon, comics. They're like pretty fun and interesting, and make the comics just a little bit more interesting sometimes. But yeah, like I really enjoy the voice acting, especially the narrator in this game. The narrator, I know some people may be hit or miss with, but I like the narrator. I like how, for example, he gets excited when you like spin a higher number, or when you get a payday square, or how he sounds bland, almost pretty disappointed if you get a low salary or having to be spun on a low number. He kind of just sounds, oh, okay, cool, you did that. Like, I don't know, the narrator is pretty interesting. And to go back to the comics really quick, even though I've mentioned kind of like how they're hit or miss, which I'll get into a little bit more in a bit, I think the comic style, like the comic, art style, is pretty cool. It stays with the game, but sometimes they look pretty interesting and fun too with some of the liberties they take. Like, for example, some of the animals are pretty funny that way, even though there's no like animals obviously within the 3D, animated parts of the game. It's still fun, and I like it a lot. And again, the voice acting delivery for the comics make them so much fun to me, and I think that's what gets me the chuckle. Isn't exactly the joke, but the delivery of the line, and sometimes the expressions of the characters within the comic kind of just get to me, versus the overall joke. But yeah, I think the graphics and sound and everything are pretty good for what they are, and the voice acting is good as well. That way, just overall, this part of the game is not bad. Again, I'm not saying that it's gonna be top tier with games of today, though probably maybe a little bit better considering that a game that's coming out now can be really hit or miss, so who knows. But it's still fun and interesting what they were able to accomplish with the graphics and sound. And speaking of sound, I want to go into the soundtrack a little bit. I'm not gonna go into crazy detail because there's not really too much to talk about with the soundtrack, but the soundtrack is interesting. I really love what they did with the soundtrack as they implemented it with the game. As I said before, you have different decades you go through. You pretty much, while you're driving through the game, quote unquote driving, you go through different toll gates with the obviously decade on it, and it changes the soundtrack for whatever decade you're in. Like I said, 70s or for disco. For 80s, it's a new wave, and 90s electronics and stuff like that. I mean, we're in 2000s, so they didn't really know what the music was for 2000s, but I think it was a good enough guess, I suppose, for what they did. But it's still fun. But I like how they just implemented it. So I think it's interesting to me that like they really implemented the game. The one thing I want to talk about, just joke wise, just anyway, because I can, the 90s track, I don't know how to describe it, the sound she makes, but essentially it sounds kind of like me when I have a weird hiccup burp, and I know that sounds weird putting it that way, but like just trust me when I say that's what it sounds like exactly to me. So yeah, have that as what you will. But other than that, it's kind of interesting, and it makes it fun in the game, the soundtrack. It's not annoying, the soundtrack. It's not like it just completely vanishes into the background. It makes the game just a little bit iconic in its own way. The fact that the soundtrack kind of stays with you, especially obviously the main theme of the game too, when you're in the menus and all that. But yeah, like the soundtrack is really good and stands out to me at least a bit. Not crazy, but enough where, again, they implement it within the game so it stays memorable that way. And now, sadly, I have to at least get into the parts of this game that I have some gripe with. There's not too much, thankfully, with this game, unless, of course, it could be my nostalgia just completely blocking out the stuff that are really bad, considering I've seen some reviews for this game, and hit or miss. I mean, there's not a lot of reviews for this game anyway, but not the point. But when it comes to the cutscenes and stuff like that, you're gonna land on the same spaces a lot. So you're gonna see a lot of the same cutscenes, and it kind of sucks in a way, because it does lose a little bit of the charm of the game when that happens. You kind of are like, oh, okay, cool. I already seen this like what, the 5th time already. If this only happens if you're replaying the game a lot of times, like in a couple times in a row. You know, you kind of will notice this become a trend. For example, you're always gonna like. There's always a likely chance that you're gonna like land on getting robbed. You know, having your house robbed. So that one's you're gonna see quite a bit of time. Another gripe I have about this game is how easily you lose a turn. Now I don't know, maybe this could have been something in the original game, but I feel like it's really easy to lose a turn in the beginning. Well, I mean, it's only in the beginning of the game. They have a lot of lose a turns. It just seems like the spinner doesn't randomize well enough that way, so you're likely going to lose a turn. And it wouldn't be bad if it doesn't majority of the time cost you. I think only like one game out of the both versions I played, I actually won. And it wasn't even me. I was just playing as a quote unquote player that way, like the other players. But like that's the only time I really won. But a lot of the other times I played on footage and off footage, I would lose a turn. I would most likely lose, because the problem is you have to make money. If you don't make money, it kind of sucks, especially if you're going through college first. You're already lost a lot of money anyway, and if you have to write a term paper, you're even gonna have to deal with just not having a job yet, let alone being able to make money. And even if you do make more money and the other players lose money, they still have made quite a bit of money, or are going to be making more money than you have already, even if you have a higher salary. It just kind of sucks. I just wish that the randomizing of the spinner was a little bit better with that. I don't know, or at least made it a little bit more fair to catch up. It just seems really hard to catch up in this game. Like, the other players have to be completely screwed a lot of the time in order for that to happen. But, I mean, what am I gonna do? I can't fix a game that's from 98. I'm gonna be able to make an update for it, you know, I'm not that technical. Then there's obviously the comics. Like I said, I kind of want to go a little bit more of the jokes in the comics. I think the writing in this game is a little weird with the comics. Again, it could be that I'm just really young and just don't understand some of the jokes, or the jokes are just really corny, and I like corny jokes, but maybe there is a little bit too much. But again, it's a family game, so I think they were trying to keep them as basic as possible, but also trying to get like anyone who's older to laugh at them a little bit. But really, it kind of misses the mark. But Yeah, but in either way, honestly, there's not really other things that like really bother me about this game other than those like little things, to me. Again, it could be my nostalgia just completely blocking out all the other parts that like are pretty bad. Maybe I should play a little bit more, but I mean, I played a bit more off, footage and camera and stuff like that, and I don't know. I didn't really hit much that like made me go, There's just these things. So for the most part, though, it doesn't really affect the game too much. You might get to a point where you want to turn off animations, maybe, if you see the same cutscenes over and over again, and they may get boring to you. But for the most part, it's not bad. It's pretty fun for the most part. So yeah, overall, it doesn't affect the game too much if you're not bothered by those things, of course. And now, since we're getting closer to the end of this video, I think it's a good time to talk about the PlayStation version of this game. Now, keep in mind, I've not really played this one a lot since the PC version was the one I grew up with the most. The PlayStation 1 version I got like a couple years ago at most, so I've not really touched it or played it much, so with my opinions on it, kind of keep it with a grain of salt, because it's kind of just, yeah, my opinions. Maybe you might prefer it more than I would, but yeah, so let's get into the smaller bits of differences of the game. So, for example, the menu navigation's a little bit different than the PC version. There's only new game, load game, and options menu. And the options menu itself is pretty bland. There's no images or pictures with it. Not like really much to look here. Obviously, no online mode because the PlayStation 1 was definitely not capable of doing that. Let alone the PlayStation 2. I mean, PlayStation 2 did get the option to have network mode, but it was not as popular until like the PlayStation 3 era with the PlayStation Network and all that. But that's not what this video is about, obviously. But yeah, like the menu is pretty simple. There's not really too much there to talk about that way. Then there's obviously the select screen, which again, not terribly different. There are additional like boxes like in text styles that change throughout that. And then of course there is the gameplay style, which is not terribly different overall. There's still the animations and the sound effects and all that, are still apparent throughout the game, obviously. But it's how you play. Instead of a point and click type style with the mouse, you have button mapped to different things you can do within the game. For example, X is to do the spinner. And instead of actually just clicking the spinner and spinning automatically, you can actually charge the spinner for a longer or shorter spin, which is something I kind of wish they had in the game. I feel like that would have been much more interesting, but whatever, I digress. Square is to buy stuff, which, again, you've always been able to do in the game. You can buy stocks and all that, jazz. Triangle is to look at the other player's stats, so where they're at, whether your stats or anyone else's. And circle is to get a bigger picture of the map. That way, pause is, pause and all that jazz. But yeah, nothing really too crazy there overall. Like the differences are there, but they're not like drastic. The only difference, and that's very apparent when you will play the PlayStation version of this game, is the graphics. Now, to put it this way, I believe that the PlayStation version was not top priority. It was definitely the PC version. It was made first, and clearly it was ported after it was done being developed onto the PlayStation by the Collective. Now, I'm not saying the Collective is at any fault for this. It is definitely the fact that the graphics for the PC were just much more powerful than the PlayStation. It's always been this way. It's always been this way, and it forever will be. The PC will always have built more graphics control, how you can have it versus the PlayStation. But the game kind of just, the quality drop just kind of doesn't do well for the game. It kind of makes it a little boring looking in a way. The color saturation is bad, and the pixelation is pretty high for that. Now, it could have been my recording. Again, I'm not having to say that I got top tier equipment, but even if you look online with the comparison videos of the PC version versus the PlayStation, you can clearly see there is quite a difference. The sound quality is quite choppy. It's not a great port. Again, I am not blaming the Collector for this. It is just the fact that the PlayStation just isn't able to handle it as well as it could have been. And yeah, to me, if I was gonna pick between the PlayStation PC, I would clearly pick the PC just because it's far more superior that way. And I think that was the intent in the first place, was that people should have played the PC version. And it's kind of interesting because I've never seen any reviews for the PC version, just for the PlayStation. So I feel like that kind of says something. I think that people just looked at the PlayStation version because it was more probably easily available versus the PC. So I don't know, but overall, the PlayStation 1 isn't really great of a version. Again, that could just be me because, again, I have more nostalgia for the PC version, but the PlayStation just, it's okay. If you have no options, the PlayStation works, but the PC version, if you're able to get it, is just a much better experience. You're getting the actual experience that the developers wanted you to have in the first place. So, but I digress. Either way, yeah, if you want to, you can play the PlayStation version. There's not too much difference. It's just the graphics and sound quality is not going to be that great. But yeah, that's pretty much really it when it comes to the PlayStation. And before I wrap up this video, I kind of want to go into a bit of detail of the nostalgia and my childhood with the Game of Life, at least at this version of the Game of Life, and how much it really means to me. I mean, I remember going onto my old family computer, and I mean, I'm talking about old, we're talking about XP era with this game, at least when I was playing it, and just how much fun I had with it as a kid. I remember playing against the bots and sometimes even, playing against my family, like my usually be my dad or sister. My mom really wasn't a computer person, so it would just be usually those two, but it was still always fun with being able to play with them, especially how busy my dad would be and all that. And yeah, like it's just really nice to just be able to go back and look at this game and have a lot of memories be unlocked with like some of the cutscenes and the sound effects and everything like that. Just coming back into my brain and just remembering just the good times of my childhood when I had, So yeah, anyway, with that, I'm gonna wrap up the video here. If you like the video, like it. If you dislike it, comment below. If you ever played this version of the Game of Life, or this is your first time hearing about it now, and if I do more videos like this, so what other games would you like me to cover, or even anything else, honestly? And subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. So, bye, guys.